The Valdari Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had conquered more than 3,000 star systems. They had crushed hundreds of species under their boots. Some they made into slaves. Others they simply destroyed. The Valdari believed they were the greatest beings in the universe. And for 10,000 years, nobody had proven them wrong. Supreme Commander Tavalis stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was tall, even for a Valdari. His gray skin was marked with the scars of 100 battles. His 4 eyes, yellow like dying suns, stared at the holographic display before him. A small blue planet rotated slowly in the light. "Earth," said his science officer, a thin Valdari named Kesix. "Third planet from their star. Mostly water. 1 moon. Primitive civilization." "How primitive?" Tavalis asked. His voice was deep and cold. "They have basic space travel. They have landed on their moon and sent small machines to nearby planets. But they have no faster-than-light capability, no planetary shields, no orbital weapons. They are perhaps 200 years away from becoming a real spacefaring species." Tavalis smiled. It was not a kind smile. "And the population?" 8 billion. They call themselves humans. They are soft creatures. 2 eyes, weak bodies. They live only 80 years on average." Kesix made a sound of disgust. "They spend most of their time fighting each other." "Fighting each other?" Tavalis was amused. "They are not even united?" "No, Supreme Commander. They have nearly 200 separate nations. They have different languages, different religions, different governments. They are constantly at war with themselves. They have weapons that could destroy their whole planet, yet they have not destroyed themselves. Barely." Tavalis laughed. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. "Perfect. A divided primitive species. They will fall in days, perhaps hours." He turned to his fleet commander, a battle-hardened warrior named Draxus. "How many ships do we have?" 200 warships, Supreme Commander. 50,000 ground troops. More than enough for a planet of primitives." "It is overkill," Tavalis said. "But I want this done quickly. We need the resources of their system. The metals in their asteroid belt will fuel our expansion for another century." He looked at the blue planet one more time. It was beautiful, he admitted. Blue and green and white. Filled with life. Filled with creatures who had no idea that death was coming for them. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. "We arrive in 3 cycles." The Eternal Dominion and its fleet of 200 warships turned toward the small solar system. The greatest military force in the galaxy was about to descend upon a planet of primitives. Tavalis was certain it would be the easiest conquest of his long career. He was wrong. 30 years before the Valdari fleet arrived, a radio telescope in West Virginia detected something unusual. Dr. Sarah Chan was the first to see the signal. She was young then, only 28 years old, working the night shift at the Green Bank Observatory. When the pattern appeared on her screen, she thought it was a mistake. But it was not a mistake. The signal was clearly artificial. It was clearly from deep space. And when her team finally decoded it, they found something that changed everything. It was a Valdari military communication. A message between 2 warships discussing the conquest of a planet called Trellis 4. The message described the attack in detail. How the Valdari had destroyed the planet's cities from orbit. How they had killed 6 billion beings in less than a day. How they had taken the survivors as slaves. Dr. Chun's hands shook as she read the translation. She understood what it meant. The universe was not empty. There were other beings out there. And they were not friendly. She reported her discovery to the United States government. Within hours, the leaders of the world's most powerful nations knew the truth. They held an emergency meeting in secret. What they decided in that meeting would change the course of human history. They decided to prepare for war. The public never knew. The governments of the world agreed to keep the discovery secret. If people knew that hostile aliens existed, there would be panic, chaos. Civilization might collapse before the aliens even arrived. So they worked in secret. The United States, Russia, China, the European Union, and eventually every major nation joined together. They created the United Earth Defense Coalition, the UEDC. Its purpose was simple: prepare humanity to fight an enemy from the stars. For 30 years, they worked. They built bunkers deep underground on every continent. They created hidden factories that produced weapons based on technology they reverse-engineered from alien signals. They recruited the best scientists, the best soldiers, the best minds from every nation. Dr. Chun became the head of the research division. Now, in her late 50s, she had spent 3 decades preparing for this moment. She had developed weapons that no alien species had ever seen. Railguns that fired metal slugs at incredible speeds. Nanobots that could eat through any material. Viruses designed to attack alien biology. The UEDC built a fleet of warships and hid them under the oceans. They trained 1 million soldiers in secret facilities around the world. They prepared for an invasion that might never come. But it came. Admiral Yuki Tanaka was sleeping when the alert came. She was 62 years old, but she moved like someone half her age. Within seconds of hearing the alarm, she was on her feet and running toward the command center. The UEDC Antarctic Command Center was buried 2 kilometers beneath the ice. It was the most protected place on Earth. From here, Admiral Tanaka could command every defense system, every hidden weapon, every secret fleet. She arrived at the command center to find her officers already at their stations. The room was filled with holographic displays showing Earth and the surrounding space. And there, near Jupiter, was a cluster of red dots. 200 ships, said Colonel James Wright, her second in command. He was a tall black man with gray in his hair and steel in his eyes. They came out of hyperspace 10 minutes ago. They're heading toward Earth. Admiral Tanaka studied the display. Her heart was beating fast, but her face showed nothing. She had trained for this moment for 30 years. They all had. What's their speed? She asked. At current velocity, they'll reach Earth in approximately 4 days. 4 days. 30 years of preparation, and now they had 4 days. Have they tried to communicate? No, Admiral. They're coming in silent. Standard Valdari invasion protocol, based on the signals we've intercepted over the years. Tanaka nodded. She knew the Valdari playbook. They would arrive, demand surrender, and then destroy anyone who resisted. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. But humanity was not like the other species the Valdari had conquered. Humanity had been at war since the beginning of its history. Humans had spent 10,000 years killing each other in increasingly creative ways. They had invented weapons that could destroy entire cities, entire nations, entire civilizations. The Valdari had never faced an enemy like humanity. Activate Protocol Prometheus, Admiral Tanaka said. Her voice was calm and clear. All units, prepare for engagement. Wake up the sleeper fleets. Power up the orbital platforms. And get me aligned to every UEDC commander on the planet. Around the world, things began to happen. In the Sahara Desert, hidden doors opened in the sand, revealing massive railgun batteries. In the Pacific Ocean, ships that had been sleeping on the ocean floor for decades began to rise. In the mountains of Switzerland, scientists powered up weapons that could tear through any shield. In bunkers beneath Moscow, Beijing, Washington, and 100 other cities, soldiers checked their equipment and prepared for battle. Humanity was waking up. General, Marcus Cole was in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains when he received the call. He was 55 years old, a career soldier who had fought in 3 wars before being recruited into the UEDC. His face was hard, his body was scarred, and his eyes had seen too much death. "It's happening," Admiral Tanaka said through the secure communication channel. "They're here." Cole felt something stir in his chest. Fear? No. Excitement. He had spent 20 years training for this moment. He had built an army designed to fight aliens. And now, finally, he would get to use it. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Ground defense. If they get through our orbital and atmospheric defenses, your forces will be the last line. You'll need to coordinate with every regional commander." "Understood." "What about civilian evacuation?" "Already in progress. We're moving as many people as we can into the deep shelters." But with 8 billion people, Tanaka's voice trailed off. Cole understood. They couldn't save everyone. They had always known that. The best they could do was fight hard enough to drive the aliens away. "We'll be ready," he said. "I know you will." "Good luck, General." The communication ended. Cole stood up and looked at his command staff. They were all veterans, men and women who had chosen to spend their lives preparing for an invasion. They had sacrificed normal lives, families, happiness, all for this moment. "You heard the Admiral," Cole said. "This is what we trained for. Let's show these aliens what happens when they pick a fight with the wrong planet." His officers saluted. Within the hour, 100,000 soldiers would be moving into position. Ground defenses would be activated. Traps would be set. Humanity would prepare its final defense. But Cole hoped it wouldn't come to that. He hoped the orbital and atmospheric defenses would be enough. He hoped the aliens would see humanity's strength and decide to leave. He was not optimistic. Dr. Elena Vasquez was in her laboratory when the alert came. She was 43 years old, a geneticist and biologist who had spent 15 years studying alien biology from intercepted data. She knew more about Valdari physiology than any human alive. She also knew how to kill them. "The invasion has started," her assistant said, bursting into the lab. "They're coming." Elena nodded. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. In the secure vault behind her lab, there were samples of a pathogen she had designed. A virus that would attack Valdari cells but leave humans completely unharmed. It was her life's work, her masterpiece. "Start production," she said. "As much as we can make. If they land ground troops, we'll need to deploy it." "Doctor, are you sure about this?" "A biological weapon." Elena turned to face her assistant. Her eyes were cold. "They've destroyed hundreds of species. They've killed trillions of beings across the galaxy. They're coming here to do the same to us." She pointed at the vault. "That virus is our insurance policy. If we can't beat them with guns and ships, we'll beat them with biology." Her assistant swallowed hard and nodded. Within hours, the hidden laboratories across the planet would be producing millions of doses of the Valdari virus. It was a weapon of last resort, but Elena was prepared to use it. She had read the intercepted communications. She knew what the Valdari did to conquered species. She knew that surrender meant slavery or death. And she was determined that humanity would have neither. On the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Tavalis reviewed his invasion plans. They were simple because they had always worked. First, his fleet would destroy any orbital defenses. Then they would bombard the major population centers from space. Then they would land ground troops to pacify the survivors. Finally, they would take what they wanted and leave the rest to die. It had worked on 3,000 worlds. It would work on this one. "Supreme Commander," Keswick said, approaching his throne, "we have analyzed the human military forces, and They are primitive, as expected. Chemical propellant weapons, nuclear missiles, simple projectile defense systems. Nothing that can threaten our ships. Tyvelis nodded. Any surprises? None that our scans can detect. Their military forces are divided among their various nations. They have no unified command structure. They will not be able to coordinate an effective defense. Excellent. We will give them a chance to surrender. When they refuse, we will destroy them. Tyvelis leaned back in his throne. I want this done quickly. We have other conquests waiting. He had no idea that everything Kessex had told him was wrong. The humans had spent 30 years hiding their true capabilities. Their weapons were not primitive. They were not divided. And they were not afraid. The Voldari were about to learn a lesson that no species had ever taught them. Never underestimate humanity. Admiral Tanaka watched the Voldari fleet approach on her holographic display. They were moving slowly, confidently. They expected no resistance. They expected an easy victory. She smiled. Open a communication channel, she said. Let's say hello. Colonel Wright looked at her with surprise. We're going to talk to them? No, we're going to warn them. I want them to know that we're ready. I want them to know that this won't be easy. And I want it on record that we gave them a chance to turn back. Wright nodded and opened the channel. Tanaka had spent years learning Voldari language from intercepted communications. She knew how to speak to them in their own tongue. Voldari fleet, she said, her voice steady and strong. You are approaching Earth, the homeworld of humanity. You are not welcome here. Turn back now, or you will be destroyed. This is your only warning. The message was sent. Tanaka knew they would not listen. The Voldari never listened. But she wanted them to know that humanity was not afraid. Minutes later, a response came. It was Supreme Commander Tavalis, his gray face filling the screen, his 4 yellow eyes glowing with contempt. Humans, he said, you dare to threaten the Voldari Empire? You are insects beneath our feet. You will surrender your planet and your people, or you will die. Choose quickly. Tanaka smiled at the screen. It was not a friendly smile. We've made our choice, Commander. We've been making it for 30 years. Come and take our planet if you can. She cut the communication. Across the command center, her officers stared at her in silence. Then, slowly, they began to smile. Colonel Wright started to laugh. Well, he said, I guess we're doing this. We are, Tanaka confirmed. Get ready. They'll send a vanguard force first to test our defenses. That's standard Voldari tactics. We're going to destroy it. We're going to show them what humanity can do. She turned back to the holographic display. The Voldari fleet was still approaching. 4 days until they arrived. 4 days until the war began. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. She was ready. Humanity was ready. The Voldari would learn soon enough. The first shots of the war had not yet been fired, but in her heart, Admiral Tanaka already knew. Humanity would not fall. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would fight until the last soldier, the last bullet, the last breath. And the Voldari, for all their power, for all their conquests, had never faced anything like that. They were about to find out what happened when they picked a fight with a species that had been at war with itself for 10,000 years. They were about to learn why humanity was different. They were about to learn fear. The Voldari Vanguard fleet entered Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning. 50 warships, each one larger than a human aircraft carrier, descended through the clouds like dark angels of death. They expected no resistance. They expected the primitive humans to cower and scream. They expected an easy victory. Supreme Commander Tavalis watched from orbit as his vanguard began their descent. He had sent 50 ships because he did not want to waste his entire fleet on such a simple conquest. 50 ships would be more than enough to destroy humanity's major military bases and show the primitives the futility of resistance. Vanguard Leader. Report. He commanded. The voice of Fleet Captain Varath came through the communication system. He was one of Tavelis's most trusted officers, a veteran of 30 conquests. We are entering the atmosphere now, Supreme Commander. Scanners show no defensive systems. The humans have some primitive aircraft in the air, but nothing that can threaten our shields. Destroy their military installations first, then their centers of government. Make them understand that resistance is pointless. Understood, Supreme Commander. Beginning attack run. Tavelis settled back in his command chair. This would be over quickly. Within hours, the humans would be begging for mercy. Then he would move on to more important matters. He was very, very wrong. Admiral Tanaka watched the 50 ships descend on her holographic display. They were coming down over North America, Europe, and Asia, targeting the major military powers of the Old World Order. They had no idea that those military powers no longer mattered. The UEDC had unified humanity's defenses years ago. "Wait for it," she said quietly. Her officers were tense, ready to give the order to fire. But Tanaka was patient. She had waited 30 years. She could wait a few more minutes. The Voldari ships dropped lower. They were now at an altitude of 30 kilometers, well within range of humanity's hidden weapons. Their shields were up, but their weapons were not yet firing. They were still confident, still arrogant. Now, Tanaka said, across 3 continents, the Earth itself seemed to come alive. In the Sahara Desert, massive doors exploded open, revealing railgun batteries the size of buildings. These were not ordinary guns. They fired metal slugs at 30 kilometers per second, fast enough to circle the Earth in less than 90 minutes. And they fired in bursts of hundreds of rounds. The first Voldari ship never knew what hit it. One moment, it was gliding through the African sky, its crew joking about the primitive planet below. The next moment, a stream of metal slugs tore through its shields like they were made of paper. Voldari shields were designed to stop energy weapons, lasers, plasma, particle beams. They had never encountered a weapon that simply threw metal at incredible speeds. The physics were different. The shields could not adapt. The ship exploded in a ball of fire. Debris rained down on the desert below. Then the sky erupted. Fleet Captain Varath stared at his tactical display in disbelief. 7 of his ships were gone. Just gone. They had been there one moment, and then they were clouds of burning metal falling to the ground. What is happening? He screamed at his officers. Report. Unknown weapons, Fleet Captain. They appear to be kinetic projectiles fired at extreme velocity. Our shields are not designed for. The ship shook violently. Alarms blared. Smoke filled the bridge. We've been hit. Someone shouted. Vorath gripped his command chair. This was not possible. These were primitives. They should not have weapons that could hurt Voldari warships. Evasive maneuvers. He ordered. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Return fire. The remaining Voldari ships began to move, but they were not prepared for what came next. From bases hidden in mountains, valleys, and underground bunkers, humanity launched its second wave of attacks. Thousands of autonomous drones rose into the sky, each one the size of a human fist, each one carrying a small but powerful explosive. They were too small for Voldari targeting systems to track. They were too fast to shoot down. And there were too many of them. The drones swarmed toward the Voldari ships like angry bees. They found gaps in the shields, cracks in the armor, exposed systems, and vulnerable points. Then they exploded. One drone was nothing. 100 drones were a problem. 1,000 drones were a catastrophe. Another Voldari ship fell, its hull torn apart by 1,000 tiny explosions. Then another. Then another. Fleet Captain Vorath watched in horror as his Vanguard fleet was torn apart by weapons he had never seen, tactics he had never encountered. These were not the actions of a primitive species. This was the response of a civilization that had been preparing for war. Retreat. He ordered. All ships retreat. Return to the fleet. But it was not that easy. Captain Sarah Chun, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chun, was flying a modified F-35 fighter jet high above the Pacific Ocean. She was part of the UEDC's Special Air Forces, pilots trained specifically to fight alien spacecraft. Her jet was not a normal jet. It had been modified with technology reverse-engineered from alien signals. It was faster, more maneuverable, and carried weapons that no human pilot had ever used in combat. Viper Squadron, engage, came the order over her radio. Sarah smiled. She had been waiting for this moment her entire career. Viper Leader, engaging, she replied. Her Squadron 12 modified fighter jet screamed toward a Voldari warship that was trying to flee. The ship was damaged, one of its engines trailing smoke. It was running for the safety of the upper atmosphere. It would not make it. Sarah's jet was equipped with a weapon called a needle lance. It was a small missile that accelerated to incredible speeds and focused all its energy on a single point. It could punch through almost any armor. She locked onto the Voldari ship and fired. The needle lance screamed toward the alien vessel. The Voldari tried to evade, but they were too slow, too damaged. The missile hit their main reactor. The explosion lit up the sky. Sarah flew through the debris, her heart pounding with excitement and terror. She had just killed her first alien spacecraft. She had just proven that humans could fight the Voldari and win. Viper Leader, Splash One, she reported. Target destroyed. Confirmed, Viper Leader. Move to next target. There were more ships to kill. The Voldari came with all their fury. 150 warships descended upon Earth like a plague of darkness. This time, they did not descend into the atmosphere where humanity's railguns could reach them. Instead, they stayed in high orbit and unleashed their weapons from space. The bombardment began at dawn. Supreme Commander Tavalis stood on his bridge, watching as beams of energy rained down upon the blue planet. Each beam carried the power of a nuclear weapon. Each impact created a crater kilometers wide. Within the first hour, 3 major cities ceased to exist. Tokyo was hit first. 10 million people vanished in a flash of light. Then London. Then Beijing. Then Moscow. The Voldari were not targeting military installations. They were destroying population centers. They were sending a message. Keep firing, Tavalis ordered. Destroy every city with more than 1 million inhabitants. Show them what happens when they resist the Empire. His officers obeyed without question. Beam after beam struck the Earth, turning the planet's surface into a wasteland of fire and destruction. Tavalis watched with cold satisfaction. The humans had surprised him in the first battle. They had killed thousands of his soldiers and destroyed 37 ships. But now he was fighting the way the Voldari always fought, with overwhelming force and total destruction. Let them try to stop this. He thought. Admiral Tanaka stood in her command center, tears streaming down her face as she watched her planet burn. Tokyo, her hometown, where her parents had lived, where her sister had raised her children, where she had played as a child. Gone in an instant. 10 million lives erased like they had never existed. And it was just a beginning. Admiral, Colonel Wright said, his voice choked with emotion. Casualties are in the hundreds of millions. Our railguns can't reach them at that altitude. Our orbital platforms are being destroyed before they can engage. Tanaka wiped her eyes. Grief would come later. Now was the time for action. What about our hidden fleets? Not ready yet. They need another 48 hours to fully power up and coordinate. We don't have 48 hours. We might not have 48 minutes. She stared at the holographic display. Red dots marked the Valdari ships. Blue dots marked human defense systems, and those blue dots were disappearing rapidly. The Valdari were systematically destroying every weapon that could threaten them. We can't stop the bombardment, she admitted. We don't have the firepower to reach them. Then what do? Tanaka closed her eyes. She had prepared for this possibility. She had hoped it would never come to this, but she had prepared. We let them think they've won, she said slowly. We let them land their ground forces. And then we make them pay in blood for every meter of Earth they occupy. Wright's eyes widened. You're talking about guerrilla warfare. Urban combat. That will kill millions more of our own people. They're going to kill millions anyway. At least this way, we take Valdari soldiers with us. She turned to face him. Send the order to all regional commanders. Initiate Protocol Omega. We're going underground. We'll hit them from everywhere and nowhere. We'll make this planet a living nightmare for every Valdari soldier who sets foot on it. Wright hesitated for only a moment. Then he saluted and began transmitting the order. The traditional war was over. The War of Shadows was about to begin. General Marcus Cole received the order in his bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. Protocol Omega. It was the plan they had prayed they would never have to use. He gathered his officers around the table and explained the situation. The Valdari bombardment had killed over 500 million people in less than a day. Major cities around the world had been destroyed. The conventional military was in shambles. We've lost the sky, Cole said. We can't stop them from landing, but we can make them regret ever coming here. He brought up a map of North America. Red zones marked areas controlled by Valdari ground forces. Blue zones marked areas where human resistance was still active. The blue zones were shrinking every hour. The Valdari are landing troops in every major region. They're expecting to pacify the population quickly. They've done this on dozens of worlds. They think they know what to expect. He smiled grimly. They're wrong. For the next hour, he outlined the strategy. Human forces would avoid direct confrontation with Valdari military units. Instead, they would use hit-and-run tactics, ambush, bombs, snipers. They would strike from shadows and disappear before the Valdari could respond. We know this planet better than they ever will, Cole said. Every mountain, every forest, every sewer tunnel. We'll use that knowledge against them. We'll make them afraid to walk on our streets, afraid to sleep in our buildings, afraid to breathe our air. He paused, looking at each of his officers. Many of us will die, but we will take Valdari soldiers with us. And eventually, we will show them that holding Earth is not worth the cost. The officers saluted. They understood. This was not a war they could win quickly. This was a war of attrition, a war of will. The side that broke first would lose. Humanity would not break. Valdari. Ground Commander Zeroth was one of the most experienced soldiers in the Empire. He had pacified 30 worlds in his career. He knew how to crush resistance and establish control over conquered populations. But Earth was different. Within a week of landing, his forces had suffered more casualties than in his last 5 conquests combined. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They attacked in the night and vanished before dawn. They planted explosives in roads and buildings and the food supplies. They used weapons Zeroth had never seen, weapons that ignored Valdari armor, weapons that turned their own technology against them, and they were creative. Supreme Commander Tavelis stood frozen on his bridge. His tactical display showed a disaster. In less than 1 hour, 37 of his 50 Vanguard ships had been destroyed. destroyed by primitives, destroyed by a species that should not have been able to scratch his shields. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Supreme Commander," Kasich said, his voice shaking with fear. "Our intelligence was wrong. The humans have been hiding their true capabilities. They have weapons we have never encountered, tactics we have never seen. How?" Tyvelis demanded. "How could they hide this from our scans?" "I do not know, Supreme Commander. But it is clear that we have underestimated them severely." Tyvelis watched as another ship disappeared from his display. 13 ships were running for space, trying to escape Earth's atmosphere. The humans were chasing them with small, fast aircraft that moved like nothing he had ever seen. "Get those ships out of there," he ordered. "Now." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The humans had sprung their trap, and his vanguard had walked right into it. Admiral Tanaka allowed herself a small smile as she watched the surviving Valdari ships flee. 13 out of 50. They had destroyed 37 enemy warships with minimal losses. It was beyond anything she had hoped for. But she knew this was only the beginning. Colonel Wright, casualties. Wright checked his displays. "We lost 37 drones batteries, 12 fighter jets, and approximately 400 personnel. The enemy bombardment destroyed a small research facility in Norway and damaged 2 railgun positions. 400 dead." Tanaka felt each loss like a knife in her heart. But compared to what the Valdari had done to other species, billions dead in hours, this was nothing. This was victory. "The enemy will regroup," she said. "They'll come back with the full fleet. We need to be ready. Admiral, we showed them what we can do. Maybe they'll decide we're not worth the trouble." Tanaka shook her head. "The Valdari don't retreat. Their entire empire is built on conquest and fear. If they back down from primitives like us, their other conquered species might get ideas. They'll come back, and they'll come back with everything they have." She turned to face her command staff. "This was the easy part. We surprised them. We hurt them. But now they know what we can do, and they'll adapt. The next battle will be much harder. What are your orders, Admiral?" Tanaka looked at the holographic display. The remaining Valdari fleet was still in orbit, nearly 150 warships. They had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. Reload all railgun batteries, produce more drones, and prepare the orbital defense platforms. If they want Earth, they're going to have to pay for every kilometer. On the Eternal Dominion, the surviving crews of the Vanguard fleet told their stories. They spoke of weapons that came from nowhere, ships that exploded without warning, and humans who fought with terrifying ferocity. Fleet Captain Vorath knelt before Supreme Commander Tyvelis, his head bowed in shame. "I have failed you, Supreme Commander. My fleet was destroyed by creatures we believed to be primitives." Tyvelis was silent for a long moment. The rage inside him was burning like a star, but he controlled it. Rage would not help him now. He needed to think. "Tell me what you saw," he said finally. "Every detail." Vorath described the battle. The railguns that tore through shields. The drones that were too small to target. The human aircraft that moved with impossible speed and skill. The way the humans had coordinated their attacks, as if they had been preparing for this exact moment. They knew we were coming, Tyvelis realized. They have been preparing for years. Decades, perhaps. But how, Supreme Commander? How could they know? Tyvelis remembered the human admiral's words. "We've been making it for 30 years, she had said. 30 years. They had known about the Valdari for 30 years, and they had spent that time preparing. They intercepted our communications, he said. They learned about us before we learned about them. And instead of panicking, instead of destroying themselves as primitives usually do, they united and prepared for war. The realization was shocking. In 10,000 years of conquest, the Valdari had never encountered a species that had done this. Other races had tried to fight, yes, but they had always been surprised, always been unprepared. The humans were different. They are not primitives, Tavelis said slowly. They are warriors, a species that has been at war with itself for their entire history. They have been practicing for this moment without knowing it. He stood up from his command chair and walked to the viewport. Earth floated below, blue and beautiful and deadly. We will not underestimate them again, he declared. We will attack with the full fleet. We will destroy their hidden weapons from orbit. We will burn their cities and crush their armies. And when we are done, there will be nothing left of humanity but ashes and slaves. He turned to face his officers. Prepare the fleet for full assault. We attack in 6 hours. The officers saluted and hurried to obey. Tavelis looked back at Earth. You surprised us, humans, he whispered. You hurt us, but you have not defeated us. And you cannot defeat us. We are the Valdari Empire. We have conquered 3,000 worlds. You are just one more. But deep in his heart, in a place he would never admit existed, Tavelis felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt doubt. On Earth, the survivors of the first battle celebrated briefly. In the hidden bunkers and secret bases, soldiers cheered and hugged each other. They had done the impossible. They had fought the Valdari and won. But Admiral Tanaka did not celebrate. She knew what was coming. She stood alone in her command center, staring at the holographic display. The Valdari fleet was gathering, preparing for their next attack. 150 warships, plus all their fighters and ground forces. It was enough firepower to destroy entire planets. And they were angry. Admiral, Colonel Wright said, entering the room. The crews are celebrating. They're calling it a miracle. It's not a miracle, Tanaka replied. It's just the beginning. The Valdari will hit us with everything they have next time. We won't be able to stop them all. Then what do we do? Tanaka turned to face him. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set with determination. We make them pay for every inch of our planet. We fight them in the air, on the ground, in the cities, in the mountains. We never surrender. We never give up. And we make them understand that conquering Earth will cost them more than it's worth. Wright nodded slowly. That's a high price to pay. It is. Millions will die. Maybe billions. But if we don't fight, everyone dies. Everyone becomes slaves. I've read the intercepted communications, Colonel. I know what they do to conquered species. Death is better than that fate. She looked back at the display. The Valdari fleet was almost ready to move. Send a message to all UEDC commanders, she ordered. The enemy is coming with their full force. Prepare for the fight of our lives. And tell them. She paused, searching for the right words. Tell them that today, we showed the galaxy that humans don't go quietly. We fight. We survive. We win. And we're going to keep doing it until the last one of us is dead or the last Valdari ship is burning. Wright saluted and left to deliver the message. Admiral Tanaka stood alone, watching the enemy fleet prepare its attack. She was not afraid. She had made her peace with death long ago. All that mattered now was making the enemy pay the highest possible price. Humanity had won the first battle. The Valdari had lost 37 ships and thousands of soldiers. But Tanaka knew the truth. The real war was about to begin. And humanity would face it head-on, as they had faced every challenge in their long and bloody history. Not with fear, but with fury. Not with surrender, but with defiance. The Valdari wanted Earth. They would have to take it from humanity's cold, dead hands. And even then, humanity would find a way to fight back. That was what the Valdari did not understand. That was what made humanity different from every other species they had conquered. Humans never stopped fighting. Never. One night, Zirath's forward command post was attacked by a group of human children. They walked toward the base with their hands up, looking like refugees seeking shelter. The Vaulderie guards let them approach, and then the children exploded. They had been wearing explosive vests. Zirath stared at the report in disbelief. What kind of species sent their children to die as weapons? "They are monsters," one of his officers said, his voice shaking. "No," Zirath replied slowly. "They are survivors. They do whatever it takes to win, and they are willing to sacrifice everything, even their young, to resist us." He had never faced an enemy like this. Other conquered species had fought, yes, but they had always had limits. The humans seemed to have none. "Increase patrols," he ordered. "Trust no one. Not the elderly, not the children, not even the ones who claimed to surrender. They are all potential enemies." But even as he gave the order, Zirath knew it would not be enough. The humans were not fighting to win in the traditional sense. They were fighting to make the occupation so costly that the Empire would choose to leave. And they were succeeding. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked in a hidden laboratory deep beneath the Swiss Alps. The Vaulderie bombardment had destroyed most of humanity's research facilities, but this one had survived. It was here that she had perfected her greatest creation, a virus designed to kill Vaulderie soldiers. The virus was elegant in its simplicity. It targeted a specific protein in Vaulderie cells, one that was completely absent in human biology. To a human, the virus was harmless. It would pass through their system without causing any symptoms. But to a Vaulderie, it was death. Symptoms began within hours of exposure: fever, weakness, internal bleeding. By the end of the second day, the infected Vaulderie could no longer stand. By the third day, they were dead. And the virus spread easily. Airborne transmission, contact transmission, waterborne transmission. Once it was released, it would spread through the Vaulderie occupation forces like wildfire. Elena had created a biological weapon of mass destruction. She stood in her laboratory, looking at the rows of vials containing the virus. Each vial contained enough to infect thousands. She had created enough to kill millions. "Doctor," her assistant said, entering the room. "The carriers are ready." Elena nodded. The carriers were human volunteers, men and women, who had agreed to be infected with a harmless version of the virus that would make them carriers. They would spread the disease to Vaulderie soldiers simply by being near them. By the time the Vaulderie realized what was happening, it would be too late. "Are you certain about this?" her assistant asked. This is biological warfare. It's against every law we ever had." Elena turned to face her. "What laws? What civilization? Look outside, Maria. Our cities are craters. Our people are being slaughtered. The Vaulderie are not constrained by laws or morality. Why should we be?" She picked up one of the vials and held it up to the light. "This is our weapon. This is how we fight back. Not with honor, not with rules, but with whatever works." She looked at her assistant. "I know what I'm doing is terrible. I know that future generations might judge me as a monster. But future generations will exist because of what I do today. And that's all that matters." She handed the vial to her assistant. "Begin distribution. Target the Vaulderie command centers first. I want their leadership infected within the week." The assistant took the vial with trembling hands and left. Elena stood alone in her laboratory, surrounded by instruments of death. She had spent her life as a healer, a scientist who wanted to understand life and protect it. Now she was an architect of genocide. But she felt no regret. The Vaulderie had given humanity no choice. They came to enslave and destroy. They came to end humanity's story. And humanity would do whatever it took to survive. Whatever it took. The virus spread faster than even Elena had predicted. Within 2 weeks, Valdari soldiers across the planet began to fall ill. At first, the Valdari commanders thought it was a strange Earth disease, something natural that their doctors could cure. But the disease did not respond to any treatment. It continued to spread, and soldiers continued to die. Ground Commander Zereth lost 10% of his forces in the first month. Then 20%. Then 30%. His soldiers were terrified. They wore sealed suits, they purified their air and water, but still the sickness found them. "It's the humans," one of his officers said. "They've created a weapon. A biological weapon targeting our species." Zereth knew his officer was right. The humans had done something no other species had ever done. They had turned biology into a weapon against the Valdari. "How do we fight this?" he demanded. "We cannot, Ground Commander. Our doctors have never seen anything like it. The virus is specifically designed to attack Valdari cells. It leaves humans completely unharmed." The officer's voice cracked. "They have weaponized the very air we breathe." Zereth felt something cold grip his heart. Fear. Real fear. He had fought enemies with superior technology. He had fought enemies with greater numbers. But he had never fought an enemy who could kill him just by standing next to him. "Send a message to Supreme Commander Tavalis," he said. "Tell him the situation on the ground is deteriorating. We cannot hold this planet. We need to withdraw, or we will lose the entire ground force." The message was sent. Zereth waited for the reply. When it came, his blood ran cold. Negative. Withdrawal is not permitted. Hold your positions. Reinforcements are coming. There would be no retreat. The Supreme Commander would rather let them all die than admit defeat. Zereth looked out at the Earth landscape, the ruins of human cities, the fields scorched by Valdari weapons, the forests where human guerrillas waited in shadow. This planet was a trap. A beautiful, deadly trap. And the Valdari had walked right into it. In the Battle of the Sahara, General Marcus Cole achieved something that would become legend. A Valdari ground division, 40,000 soldiers, was moving across the desert toward a human refugee camp. Cole had only 10,000 soldiers, poorly equipped and exhausted. By any reasonable measure, he should have retreated. He did not retreat. Instead, he used the desert itself as a weapon. His soldiers lured the Valdari deeper into the Sahara, away from their supply lines and support. Then they waited for the sandstorm. The storm came on the third day, as Cole had predicted. Winds of over 200 kilometers per hour, carrying sand that could strip flesh from bone. Cole's soldiers were prepared. They had shelters, protective gear, experience. The Valdari had none of these things. As the storm raged, Cole attacked. His soldiers emerged from the sand like ghosts, striking at the confused and blinded Valdari. They destroyed supply vehicles, killed officers, and vanished back into the storm before the enemy could respond. The battle lasted 3 days. When the storm finally passed, the Valdari division had been annihilated. 40,000 soldiers, dead or captured. Cole's forces had lost only 2,000. It was the greatest human victory of the ground war. News of the Battle of the Sahara spread across the planet. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had hope. If they could destroy 40,000 Valdari in the desert, maybe they could win this war. Cole became a symbol, a legend. The man who had used Earth itself as a weapon against the invaders. But Cole knew the truth. The victory was impressive, but it was not enough. The Valdari still controlled the skies. They still had ships in orbit. They could still destroy any target on Earth from space. To truly win, humanity needed to take the fight to space. And that was exactly what they were planning. Supreme Commander Tavelis received the report on the Battle of the Sahara with cold fury. 40,000 soldiers, gone, destroyed by a handful of primitives using sand and wind as weapons. And the reports of the sickness were even worse. A third of his ground forces were dead or dying. Morale was collapsing. Soldiers were refusing orders, terrified of an enemy they could not see and could not fight. "This planet is cursed," Keswick said, his voice barely a whisper. "The humans have turned it into a weapon. Everything here kills us: the diseases, the climate, the people." "Silence," Tavelis hissed. But he knew his science officer was right. Earth was not like any other world they had conquered. It was a death trap. A world that fought back with every breath, every grain of sand, every invisible particle in the air. And the humans were at the center of it. A species that had spent 10,000 years at war. A species that knew how to fight, how to survive, how to adapt. They had studied the Valdari for 30 years, and they had created weapons specifically designed to destroy them. "We will hold," Tavelis declared. "We will find a cure for the sickness. We will crush the resistance. And we will conquer this planet." But even as he spoke the words, he was not certain he believed them. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Valdari Empire was facing the possibility of defeat. And the creature responsible was a primitive, short-lived species from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Humanity. Admiral Tanaka stood in her command center, reviewing the latest reports. The ground war was going better than expected. The virus was spreading through the Valdari forces. The guerrilla attacks were causing massive casualties. The enemy was bleeding. But it was not enough. The Valdari still controlled space. Their ships still floated in orbit, ready to. The Pacific Ocean was calm when the ships began to rise. For 30 years, humanity's secret fleet had waited on the ocean floor. 60 warships built in hidden underwater facilities, crewed by sailors who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. They were humanity's final weapon, the last hope of a species on the edge of extinction. Now they rose. The surface of the Pacific churned and boiled as the ships emerged. They were not beautiful like the Valdari vessels. They were rough, functional, covered in weapons. They looked like they had been built by a species that had no time for elegance, only effectiveness, because that was exactly what they were. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the U.S. Unconquered, the flagship of humanity's fleet. Through the viewport, she could see the other ships taking formation around her. 60 ships against nearly 150. The odds were terrible, but Tanaka had faced terrible odds before. All of humanity had faced terrible odds before. And they were still here. "All ships, report status," she commanded. One by one, the ship captains responded. Weapons charged. Crews ready. Engines at full power. "Launch in 10 minutes, Tanaka said. "Remember your training. Remember what they did to our cities. Remember everyone we've lost." She paused, looking out at Earth, her wounded, burning, beautiful planet. "And remember that the fate of our species depends on what we do in the next few hours." She took a deep breath. Launch operation. Fenrir, 60 ships ignited. Their engines and screamed toward the sky. Supreme Commander. Tavelis was in his quarters when the alarm sounded. He had been trying to sleep, something he had not done properly in weeks. The stress of the occupation, the sickness killing his soldiers, the constant attacks from human guerrillas, it was wearing on him. He rushed to the bridge. "Report," he demanded. "Ships, Supreme Commander." Human warships, emerging from the planet's oceans. 60 vessels heading for orbit. Tavelis stared at the tactical display. Where had these ships come from? His scans had not detected any orbital facilities, any shipyards. The humans had hidden an entire fleet beneath their oceans. For a moment, he felt something like admiration. These creatures were clever, far cleverer than he had ever imagined. Then the admiration faded, replaced by cold determination. "All ships, battle formation," he ordered. "We outnumber them more than 2 to 1. Destroy them." The Valdari fleet began to move. The Battle of Earth's orbit began at 0347 hours. Earth time. Admiral Tanaka watched as the Valdari fleet approached. 143 ships against 60. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. The humans should have been destroyed in minutes, but the humans had advantages that did not show up on paper. "All ships, execute pattern Omega," Tanaka commanded. The human fleet scattered. Instead of meeting the Valdari in a straight line, they dispersed into small groups of 5 or 6 ships each. It was a tactic that went against every principle of space. Warfare, a scattered fleet was easier to pick off piece by piece, unless the scattered fleet was trying to be picked off. The Valdari ships pursued the fleeing human vessels, breaking their own formation to chase what they thought were easy targets. And that was when the trap was sprung. The human ships were not running. They were luring as the Valdari vessels spread out. The human groups turned and attacked. They focused their fire on single enemy ships, overwhelming them with concentrated firepower before the other Valdari could respond. And they were much faster than the Valdari had expected. Human ships were designed for this kind of warfare. Quick attacks. Brutal efficiency. No wasted effort. Within the first hour, the Valdari had lost 17 ships. The humans had lost only 4. Captain Sarah Chun flew her fighter through the chaos of battle. She had been promoted after the first engagement, putting command of an entire fighter squadron. Now she led 50 pilots against the Valdari fleet, darting between the massive warships like mosquitoes around elephants. But these mosquitoes had fangs. Her squadron had been assigned to a special mission: clear a path to the Valdari flagship. The Eternal Dominion was the heart of the enemy fleet. If they could disable or destroy it, the entire Valdari command structure would collapse. "Viper Squadron, form up on me," she ordered. "We're going for the big one." Her fighters fell into formation behind her. Ahead, the Eternal Dominion loomed like a mountain in space 2 kilometers long, covered in weapons, surrounded by escort ships. "That's a lot of guns," one of her pilots said. "Good thing we're small," Chun replied. "Stay close to me. We're going in fast and dirty." She pushed her throttle forward. Her fighter accelerated toward the flagship at incredible speed. The Valdari saw them coming. Point defense weapons opened fire, filling space with energy bolts. Chun's squadron weaved and dodged, their modified jets dancing through the storm of fire. 3 of her pilots were hit. Their ships exploded in brief flashes of light. Chun forced herself not to think about it. She could mourn later. Right now, she had a mission. Her squadron reached the flagship's hull and began their attack run. They flew along the surface, targeting weapon systems, sensor arrays, anything that looked important. Behind her, explosions bloomed on the Valdari hull. "All Viper units, target the main engines," Chun commanded. "Let's slow this thing down." Her remaining pilots followed her toward the massive engine section at the rear of the ship. The engines were protected by heavy armor, but Chun knew where the weak points were. Human intelligence had been studying Valdari ship designs for years. She lined up her shot and fired. Her needle lance struck true, punching through the armor and into the engine core. Secondary explosions rippled through the engine section. The Eternal Dominion shuddered and began to slow. "Direct hit," Chun shouted. "All Vipers break off and regroup." Her squadron scattered as Valdari fighters came screaming toward them. Chun looked back at the flagship. Smoke was pouring from its engines. It was crippled. Now the real attack could begin. Admiral Tanaka saw the flagship's engines go dark and allowed herself a grim smile. "The Eternal Dominion is crippled," Colonel Wright reported. "Their fleet is losing coordination. Now's our chance. All ships, focus on the flagship. Boarding teams, prepare to launch." The human fleet converged on the wounded Voldari flagship. It was still dangerous, still covered in weapons, still full of soldiers. But it could not run, and without its coordination, the other Valdari ships were fighting independently. The Valdari fought back desperately. 3 more human ships were destroyed, then 4 more. But for every ship humanity lost, the Voldari lost too. The tide of battle was turning, and on the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Tavelis was about to face a nightmare he had never imagined. The boarding pods hit the flagship's hull like bullets. Each pod carried 20 soldiers, the best of humanity's special forces. They were equipped with armor that could withstand Valdari weapons and guns that could punch through Valdari shields. They were the tip of the spear, the warriors who would take the fight to the enemy in their own home. General Marcus Cole was in the first pod. He had insisted on leading the assault. Personally, Admiral Tanaka had argued against it. Cole was too valuable to risk in close combat. But Cole had won the argument. "I've spent 20 years training for this," he had said. "I'm not going to watch from a bunker while my soldiers risk their lives." Now he was inside the Valdari flagship, fighting his way toward the bridge. The corridors were chaos. Smoke and fire everywhere. Valdari soldiers in every shadow, fighting desperately to repel the invaders. Cole's team pushed through them, room by room, corridor by corridor. "Stay together," Cole shouted. "Cover each other." A Valdari soldier jumped out of a doorway, weapon firing. Cole shot him in the chest before he could get off a second burst. 2 more soldiers appeared behind him. Cole's team cut them down. They were close now. The bridge was only 50 meters away, but between them and the bridge was a wall of Valdari soldiers. Elite guards, the best the Empire had. They were not going to surrender. "Grenades!" Cole ordered. His soldiers threw their explosives. The corridor filled with fire and shrapnel. The Valdari guards staggered, some falling, others still fighting. Cole charged. He had spent his whole life preparing for moments like this. Close combat, chaos, death in every corner. This was what he had been born to do. He moved through the enemy like a storm. His gun fired in controlled bursts. His knife found gaps in armor. Valdari soldiers fell before him, one after another. His team followed, finishing off the survivors. Within 2 minutes, the corridor was clear. "Move!" Cole shouted. "The bridge is right there." They ran for the doors. Supreme Commander Tavelis heard the fighting getting closer. His guards were dying. His ship was dying. Everything he had built was collapsing around him. He stood in the center of his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his officers. Some had been killed by the human bombardment, others by his own hand when they had suggested surrender. The Voldari did not surrender. Ever. The doors to the bridge exploded inward. Human soldiers poured through, their weapons raised. Tavelis drew his ceremonial blade, a sword that had been in his family for 1,000 years, and prepared to die with honor. "Supreme Commander Tavelis," said the human leader, stepping forward. He was a large man, covered in blood that was not his own. His eyes were cold. "I am General Marcus Cole. On behalf of the United Earth Defense Coalition, I accept your surrender." Tavelis laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "The Valdari do not surrender. Then you die here." Tavelis looked at the human. This creature, this primitive from a backwater planet, had done what no one had done in 10,000 years. He had defeated the Voldari. "What are you?" Tavelis whispered. It was the same question he had asked before, but now it held a different meaning. Now it was asked in wonder, not contempt. Cole's answer was quiet. We are the species that spent 10,000 years at war with itself. We are the species that invented 1,000 ways to kill. We are the species that never ever gives up. He stepped closer. You picked the wrong planet to invade, Commander. Tyvelis looked at his blade. He could die fighting. He could take one more enemy with him. But what would be the point? His empire was finished. His fleet was destroyed. His soldiers were dead or dying of the human plague. Even if he killed this general, it would change nothing. The Valdari were defeated. Slowly, with great ceremony, Tyvelis lowered his blade and placed it on the floor. I surrender, he said. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. May the ancestors forgive me. Cole nodded. Take him into custody. Treat him with respect. He's the first Valdari Supreme Commander ever captured. That's gotta be worth something. Two soldiers moved forward and took Tyvelis by the arms. The Supreme Commander of the Valdari Empire, conqueror of 3,000 worlds, was led away like a common criminal. General Cole looked around the bridge of the defeated flagship. Bodies everywhere. Smoke drifting through the air. The sounds of battle still echoing from other parts of the ship. They had won. The Battle of Earth's orbit lasted 42 hours. By the end, the Valdari fleet was destroyed. 143 warships reduced to debris floating in Earth's orbit. Some had been destroyed in combat. Others had fled into hyperspace, carrying the survivors away from the nightmare planet. Humanity had lost 32 ships and 24,000 crew members. It was a terrible price, but it was victory. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Unconquered, looking at the debris field where the Valdari fleet had once been. Colonel Wright, status report. Enemy fleet destroyed or fled, Admiral. Ground forces are surrendering across the planet. Supreme Commander Tyvelis is in custody. The war is... He paused, as if not believing his own words. The war is over. We won. Tanaka closed her eyes. We won. Two words that did not seem real. After 30 years of preparation, after months of death and destruction, after losing billions of people, they had won. Casualties? She asked. Final count is not complete, but we're looking at approximately 800 million dead. Mostly from the initial bombardment and the occupation. 800 million. Tanaka felt the weight of that number settle on her shoulders. 800 million people who would never see this day. 800 million people whose sacrifice had made this victory possible. We need to send a message to every UEDC commander, she said, and to every surviving civilian. Let them know the invasion is over. Let them know we won. What should the message say, Admiral? Tanaka thought for a moment. Tell him this. The battle is over. The enemy is defeated. Earth belongs to humanity. Today, we prove that we are not prey. We are not victims. We are not easy targets. We are humanity, and we will never be conquered. Wright nodded and began transmitting the message. Across the planet, in bunkers and shelters and hidden bases, people heard the news. And for the first time in months, they allowed themselves to hope. The invasion was over. Humanity had survived. On the Eternal Dominion, now a captured prize, General Cole found a quiet corner and sat down. His body ached. He had been fighting for hours days, really, if you counted the entire battle. He was covered in blood, some of it his own, and he was tired. More tired than he had ever been in his life. But they had won. He thought about the soldiers he had lost, the friends who had died in the bunkers and on the battlefields, the civilians who had been killed in the bombardment. So many dead, so much sacrifice. Was it worth it? He looked out a viewport at Earth. The planet was scarred and wounded, but it was still there. Still blue and beautiful and alive. His home, yes, he decided. It was worth it. Humanity was free. The Voldari were defeated. And the galaxy would never forget what Earth had done. They had faced the greatest military power in the universe. And they had won. Cole allowed himself a small smile. Then he closed his eyes and slept. The war was over. But the story of humanity was just beginning. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On 1,000 worlds, on 100,000 stations, beings of every species heard the same incredible story. The Voldari Empire had been defeated. Not by a great galactic power. Not by an ancient civilization with thousands of years of technology. But by a primitive species from an unremarkable planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Humans, the species that had no faster-than-light travel, had stopped the most powerful military in the universe. The species that had been at war with itself for 10,000 years had turned that experience against a common enemy. The species that should have been easy prey had become the predator. For the enslaved peoples of the Voldari Empire, the news was a spark in a dry forest, on Trellis 7, where the Voldari had ruled for 300 years. The oppressed Trellisians rose up against their masters. They had heard the stories from Earth. They had heard how the humans fought with ferocity, with creativity, with absolute refusal to surrender. And they decided that if humans could do it, so could they. The Voldari garrison on Trellis 7 was destroyed in a single night. On Keseth Prime, the Kessethian slaves stopped working in the mines. They had spent generations in darkness, digging metals for their Voldari masters. But now they walked out into the light and refused to go back. The Voldari sent soldiers to force them back to work. The Kessethians fought back. They had no weapons, no training, no hope of winning. But they fought anyway. Because if the humans could fight, so could they. Across the Empire, similar scenes played out. Species that had been conquered and broken for centuries suddenly remembered what it meant to be free. They looked at the example of Earth and found the courage to resist. The Voldari Empire, undefeated for 10,000 years, began to crack. On Earth, the survivors tried to rebuild. It was not easy. 800 million people were dead. Major cities had been reduced to craters. Entire regions were contaminated by radiation and alien chemicals. The scars of the war would take generations to heal, but humanity was used to rebuilding. They had been doing it for their entire history. Admiral Yuki Tanaka became the first Supreme Commander of the United Earth Fleet. It was a position that had not existed before the war, but now it was necessary. Earth was no longer an isolated planet. It was part of a galaxy full of potential enemies and allies. We need to prepare for what comes next, Tanaka told the newly formed Earth Council. The Voldari are weakened, but they're not destroyed. They'll want revenge. And there are other powers in the galaxy that might see us as a threat. What do you suggest? Asked the council president, a former UEDC commander named David Okonkwo. We build a fleet. A real fleet, using what we've learned from the Voldari technology we captured. We train soldiers, scientists, diplomats, and we make sure that no one ever threatens Earth again. The council agreed. Within months, construction began on humanity's first true space fleet. Not hidden ships waiting for an invasion, but open, proud vessels ready to take humanity into the galaxy. General Marcus. Cole became a legend. Stories of his victories spread across Earth and beyond. The Battle of the Sahara. The boarding of the Eternal Dominion. The capture of Supreme Commander Tavois. He became a symbol of human resistance. Proof that one person could make a difference against impossible odds. The Cole was uncomfortable with fame. I did what any soldier would do, he told reporters who came to interview him. I'm not special. Every person who fought in this war is a hero. The soldiers, the scientists, the civilians who hid in bunkers and refused to give up. They're the real heroes. He returned to his military duties, training the next generation of human soldiers. He knew that the war with the Voldari might not be over. And if it was, there would be other threats. Humanity needed to be ready. We won this time because we were prepared, he told his trainees. We spent 30 years getting ready for an invasion. Next time, we might not have 30 years. We might not have 30 days. So we train. We prepare. We make ourselves so strong that no one would ever dare attack us again. His trainees listened. They were children of the invasion, young people who had lost parents, siblings, friends to the Voldari bombardment. They understood what was at stake. They would be ready. Dr. Elena Vasquez faced a more difficult fate. She was the creator of the Voldari virus, the biological weapon that had killed millions of enemy soldiers. Some called her a hero. Others called her a war criminal. The debate would continue for centuries. Elena did not care what people called her. I did what was necessary, she said in her only public statement. The Voldari came to destroy us. They had already killed 800 million people. If I hadn't created the virus, they would have killed billions more. I have no regrets. But privately, in the darkness of her bedroom, Elena did have regrets. She remembered the faces of the Voldari soldiers she had killed. They were enemies, yes, but they were also living beings, fathers, sons, creatures with hopes and dreams and fears. She had killed them not with bullets or bombs, but with a sickness she had engineered in the laboratory. It was a kind of killing that felt wrong, even if it was necessary. Elena continued her work, but she never created another biological weapon. Instead, she turned her skills to healing. She developed cures for human diseases, treatments for injuries, methods to repair the environmental damage of the war. She spent the rest of her life trying to make up for what she had done. She never felt she succeeded. 5 years after the war, Earth achieved faster-than-light travel. The technology had been reverse-engineered from captured Voldari ships, improved by human scientists and built in the new orbital shipyards. It was the breakthrough humanity had been waiting for, the key to the galaxy. The first ship to use the new drive was the UE's Pioneer. Admiral Tanaka was aboard for its maiden voyage. This is history, she said, as the ship prepared to jump. We are about to become a true spacefaring species. We will explore the galaxy. We will meet other civilizations. We will find our place among the stars. She gave the order. The Pioneer's drive activated. Space twisted around them. For a brief, terrifying moment, they were nowhere outside of normal reality, passing through dimensions humans could not understand. Then they emerged, light years from Earth, in a star system they had never visited. They had done it. Humanity had reached the stars. The first species humanity encountered was the Trellisians. The Trellisians had heard the stories of Earth's resistance. They had watched as the Voldari Empire crumbled, inspired by humanity's example. And when human ships appeared in their system, they did not flee or attack. They welcomed humanity as friends. You showed us that the Voldari could be beaten, the Trellisian leader said when she met Admiral Tanaka. For 300 years, we believed we were doomed to slavery. You proved that resistance was possible. You gave us hope. Tanaka was moved by the welcome. She had not expected to find allies so quickly. She had expected fear, suspicion, hostility. But the galaxy did not fear humanity. Not the way they feared the Voldari. They saw humanity as liberators, as proof that tyranny could be overthrown. We want to help, the Trellisian leader continued. We want to join you. Together, we can free the other species still under Voldari control. Together, we can build something better than the Empire. Tanaka agreed. The alliance between humanity and the Trellisians was the first of many. Over the next decade, humanity became the heart of a growing coalition. Species after species joined the alliance. Some were former Valdari slaves, eager for revenge against their oppressors. Others were independent civilizations that had lived in fear of the Empire for millennia. All of them saw humanity as the key to a new era. Human ships patrolled the shipping lanes. Human soldiers trained resistance fighters on occupied worlds. Human diplomats negotiated treaties and alliances. It was not colonization. Humanity had no interest in ruling other species. It was liberation. A galaxy-wide movement to free the oppressed and create a community of equals. And at the center of it all was Earth. The planet had been rebuilt, its scars healing slowly. New cities rose where old ones had been destroyed. Memorials stood on every continent, honoring the 800 million who had died. And in orbit, the United Earth Fleet grew stronger every year. No one would ever threaten Earth again. The Valdari Empire retreated to its core worlds. Their fleet was shattered. Their armies were depleted. Their conquered species had risen against them. In less than a decade, they had gone from ruling 3,000 star systems to barely holding on to 300. Supreme Commander Tyvelis watched the collapse from his prison cell on Earth. He had been tried for war crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent his days staring at the walls and thinking about what had gone wrong. He had underestimated the humans. He had seen them as primitives, as easy prey. He had not understood that their history of war had made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Now the Empire was dying, and humanity was rising to take its place. What have we done? He whispered to himself in the darkness of his cell. We awakened the monster. He died in that cell 3 years later. He was the last supreme commander the Valdari Empire would ever have. Admiral Tanaka retired at the age of 75. She had spent her entire life in service to humanity, first preparing for the invasion, then fighting the war, then building humanity's place in the galaxy. She had given everything she had. Now it was time to rest. On her last day as Supreme Commander, she stood on the observation deck of her flagship, the Use Unconquered. Through the viewport, she could see a fleet of human warships, hundreds of vessels, each one more powerful than the entire Valdari Armada that had once threatened Earth. We've come a long way, she said to Colonel Rightnow, Admiral Rightnow, her successor. We have, Wright agreed. From a species that hadn't even left our solar system to the heart of a galactic alliance. All in one generation. Tanaka smiled. I remember when I was a young officer, reading the first reports about the Valdari. I was so afraid. I thought they would come and destroy us before we could prepare. But you did prepare. You and everyone else in the UEDC. You saved humanity. No, Tanaka said softly. Humanity saved itself. I was just one part of a much larger effort. She looked at the fleet again. Make sure they remember that, right? Make sure they remember that we won because we worked together. Not as nations, not as factions, but as one species. If we forget that, we'll lose everything we've gained. I'll remember, Wright promised. Tanaka nodded. She took one last look at the fleet, the symbol of everything humanity had become, and then she turned and walked away. Her war was over. The rest was up to the next generation. 50 years after the invasion, humanity held a memorial. Every year, on the anniversary of the first Valdari bombardment, people across the galaxy paused to remember. Not just humans, but Trellisians, Cassithians, and 100 other species. They remembered the 800 million who had died. They remembered the soldiers and scientists who had sacrificed everything. They remembered what it had taken to win. On Earth, the memorial was held in Tokyo. The city had been rebuilt, its towers rising higher than before the war. At its center was a great plaza. filled with monuments to the dead. An old woman stood at the center of the plaza, surrounded by thousands of mourners. She was Dr. Sarah Chun, the scientist who had first detected the Voldari signal 80 years ago. She was over 100 years old now, kept alive by the advanced medicine humanity had developed. But she was still sharp, still passionate, still determined to remember. "We gather here today to honor those who fell," she said, her voice amplified across the plaza. "The mothers and fathers, the children and grandparents, the soldiers and civilians who gave their lives so that we could survive." She paused, looking at the crowd. Humans and aliens standing together. A galaxy united. 50 years ago, an empire came to destroy us. They thought we were weak. They thought we were easy prey. They were wrong. Her voice grew stronger. "We are humanity. We have been at war since the beginning of our history. We have faced every kind of enemy, disease, famine, each other. And we have always survived. Not because we are the strongest, or the smartest, or the most powerful, but because we never give up. Because we face every challenge with determination and courage. Because we stand together when it matters most." She raised her hand, pointing to the sky. "They came to destroy us. Instead, we destroyed them. They came to enslave us. Instead, we freed the galaxy. They thought we were prey. We showed them we were something else entirely." She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "We are humanity, and the stars themselves tremble at our name." The crowd erupted in cheers. Humans and aliens together, celebrating the species that had changed the galaxy forever. In orbit, the United Earth Fleet hung in formation, a wall of warships protecting the planet that had given birth to it all. Each ship carried the memories of those who had fought and died. Each crew knew the sacrifice that had made this moment possible. They were the guardians of humanity's future. They would make sure that no one ever threatened their people again. And far across the galaxy, in the ruins of the Voldari Empire, the surviving aliens told stories of the blue planet that had defeated them. They spoke of humans as monsters, as demons, as unstoppable forces of nature. But the freed species told different stories. They spoke of humans as liberators, as heroes, as the species that had shown the galaxy what courage really meant. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. Humans were not monsters. They were not angels. They were simply humanity, a species that had spent 10,000 years at war with itself, and had finally found something worth fighting for together. They had faced the darkness and won. And now, they were reaching for the light. The inscription on the UEDC memorial in Geneva, "We were never meant to be conquered. We were meant to conquer the darkness itself." Below it, another inscription, added 50 years after the war, in memory of the 800 million who died that humanity might live. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Their courage will echo through eternity. We are here because they stood. We are free because they fought. We are humanity, and we remember. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the memorial. They stood before the wall of names, 800 million names, each one representing a life lost, and they understood. This was what humanity had paid for victory. This was the price of freedom. And humanity had paid it without hesitation, because that was what it meant to be human. Never surrender. Never give up. Never stop fighting. Until the last star burns out. Until the universe itself falls silent. Humanity would endure. Humanity would remember. Humanity would survive. Always.